Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my great pleasure to welcome today a friend. Jay Tcath is the Executive Vice President of the Jewish United Fund Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago. And before that, he was the Senior Vice President for Public Affairs. Before that, he was in charge of the JCRC, the Jewish Community Relations Council. Before that, he served in many different other capacities. Some of the more fascinating ones was he was a captain in the United States Army, serving as a NATO air defense platoon leader in West Germany, having gone to Israel during the first Scud War with Iraq. And he has his master's degree from the University of Chicago and so many other accomplishments in his career. It's a great pleasure to welcome Jay to this conversation today. Thank you, Jay, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, Jay, I want to jump right into it because you've been very, very active recently in writing letters to the editor, opinion pieces, uh, appearing in the media regarding the rise of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel sentiments in our community, the Chicago Jewish community in particular. What's your take on what's happening now? Is it something that we have to be more than just concerned about? Is it something we should feel threatened by?
All the above, and it's like an onion with multiple layers. There are multiple, even contrasting realities at the same time. For example, poll after poll of Americans asked to name the religious people they are most admiring of as fellow Americans, Judaism comes on top as the most popular religion of all Americans. And yet, at the same time that is true, we, of course, know that Jews are the number one targets of religiously based hate crimes. So it's not black and white. There's two or multiple realities going on at the same time. We have to cultivate that, which makes us popular. And at the same time, spend, as you, as the head of a school and a synagogue, know, more and more resources, unfortunately, on physically securing our schools and our places of worship, because there is a security threat stemming from anti-Semitism.
So some have suggested to me that really the anti-Semitism that we're having is from a very small proportion of the American population. The vast majority of America is against this, that this is really more the extreme right than the extreme left. And it isn't really a danger that there hasn't been really physical violence of any significance taking place. It was more violent several years ago by the Haredim who were being beaten up in Brooklyn, and that maybe we shouldn't be that concerned. Do you? You don't share that thought, I assume.
I don't share that thought. We are threatened physically and politically by both the far right in this America and by the far left. In particular, all the attacks on synagogues have come from the far right. And I'd say the attempt to minimize Jewish influence in the public square, intimidate Jewish students on campuses, comes from the far left. And even if they are relatively small numbers, as we saw in a number of attacks, deadly attacks on synagogues, it only takes one lone wolf to wreak havoc and to kill Jews. Let's not only remember Tree of Life in Pittsburgh or Poway in California, but the attacks in Muncie and in Jersey City, which were also lethal.
So, the lone wolf, is it really something we can ever protect ourselves against? Is it something that we really shouldn't we be more concerned about what's the bigger picture?
We have to, unfortunately, as Jews, our job is to worry about both and take action against both. In the good old days, the KKK would announce their meeting dates and at which church they were gathering, and they were so kind as to post their minutes in a newsletter and who their incoming officers were. Today, with the spread of social media and the internet, we have lone wolves in the basement of their parents' house, believing in conspiracy theories and being motivated to act out on that hatred in direct, violent ways against Jewish individuals on the streets of New York and against Jewish facilities across the country.
So, is there any way to get that genie back in the bottle?
No, and to make things perhaps even more worrisome, is this isn't so much a game of numbers because the trajectory of American society seemed to be towards an ever more tolerant society, one that respects each other's community and practices. We now seem to be in decline. But when the numbers of actual haters even are declining, there's a risk that those haters, sensing that the trend of history is against them, and the only way they can get attention and new followers is to act out in dramatic, visible, violent ways. So if the haters out there feel that the wave of history is against them, it actually, ironically, even as their numbers decrease, poses a greater threat to individuals and Jewish institutions.
So, I'm feeling like I should get under my desk and put my hands over my head and just kind of curl up from this conversation. Is there a future for American Jewry with this kind of threat hanging over us?
Yes, and I certainly didn't want to leave the impression that you or any of us need to fear walking into our safe communal spaces. There's not a Jewish institution today that's not taking security seriously and investing more in it than ever before. We certainly also don't want to give the haters victory by default. That were we to become so afraid of walking into our sacred spaces, they then win by default. We can't let them win. Our places are secure, and we need to attend our services and our agencies and the programs more than ever before. They are safe. We need to be vigilant, not paranoid.
But these things have kind of careened out of control very, very quickly. You know, and it's true. It's not just about the Jewish community. It's a sense of safety in America. Growing up, we used to have, kids would walk to the park by themselves when they were little, and now everyone has to be escorted. Is there, if I go to Israel, I still have the kids walking around without parental supervision. I don't mean this as a negative, I mean it as a positive, and a war going on at the same time. What's your take on American society? Are we really are we a society in decline in general?
I hope not. We have an awful lot invested. America has long been the great hope of civilization. We have a flawed, like Israel, democracy, dysfunctional politics to be sure, but we've come through as a country many other challenging moments. There were very prominent, popular anti Semites in the 1930s, whether it was Henry Ford or Father Coughlin with the radio show out of Detroit. Those type of popular, even mainstream voices are actually less today than they were before.
And in terms of just if you were to look forward for the next steps for post-war Israel, please God, the war should end soon. Will the kinds of protests that were taking place, the movements towards Palestinian state recognition that we're seeing taking place in some countries in Europe, the whole movement from the river to the sea, do you imagine that dying down, or do you think that that's gotten its foothold and it's going to grow?
I fear that those campus protesters and the agitators from outside campus who provide a number of assistance to them are taking this summer out to plan for exactly that scenario where, God willing, Israel will be successful. The war just won't end, but it will be successfully concluded. How do these anti Israel organizers sustain the tremendous momentum? And let's look at the trend line since October 7th. Since October 7th, the violence, the hatred has been coming from these tent encampments and protests on the street. Sometimes the street protests lead to assaults on visibly identifiable Jews or Jews carrying the Israeli flag. There have not been attacks on synagogues, on Jewish community centers, which historically have been targeted by the far right wing of American society, not the far left.
And again, in terms of the feeling that we should have as a Jewish community, on the one hand, we have greater influence. I just saw a report that APAC's PAC that they have now is making tremendous inroads in terms of the politics in America and supporting candidates who are more supportive or opposing candidates who are more anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. So things are moving positively. What do you think is the most important thing that people need to take away? Like, what do they need? What do we need to be doing today?
A couple reactions. One, APAC is very smartly, very capably making investments in winnable races, which means they're sitting out some of the races of the worst anti Israel members of Congress because they want to have maximum impact with each dollar. But let's also keep in mind that when they do invest heavily in a particular race, they're not buying pro Jewish or pro Israel messaging. They're hitting the member of Congress who's not a friend with other issues that are decisive for the fence sitting voters, the economy, perhaps the environment, any number of issues, because we know the Middle East and the Israel Gaza war is not front of mind for the 98% of Americans who are not Jewish.
So, can you explain why it is that the front page of the Tribune, which does not have a really large editorial staff any longer, or every time in the Wall Street Journal and in the New York Times, what's happening in Israel seems to draw much more attention than what's happening, other tragedies, horrific atrocities that are occurring elsewhere in the world. Why are we always the center of attention?
um, on one level, it is simply a matter of capitalism that those who sell advertising know what issues are going to attract the eyeballs of the newspaper reader or the online surfer of a web, and what radio stories we will stay tuned into. So it's not always an obsession per se with the Middle East and Israel and Gaza in particular, but if American behavior didn't reward those providing that coverage, they go on to the other more compelling issues of the day. But we, the Jewish people and Israel, are a subject of interest, even if it's not going to move how most Americans decide how to vote. The other thought that came to mind um, about the situation in America, we have to be careful not to think that we're losing on every front. We are not losing on every front. We're being challenged for sure, like we've never been challenged before in Congress, in the media, on campus. But there's a risk to thinking that the sky is falling, we have no allies, and we are alone. It isn't true. And like the apocryphal boxer who never lost a fight and all of a sudden gets hit for the first time in a fight and he changes his entire strategy, even though he's actually winning. And because he changes his strategy, he ends up losing, becomes a self fulfilling dynamic. For us, we have to realize that votes in favor of Israel, whether it's a, a mere resolution or something calling for 14 billion extra dollars, wins overwhelmingly by a margin of 350 to 30 or so. We can't focus on the 30. We have to remember there's 350 others fully behind us. There's been a series of Harvard and Harris poll surveys of Americans in February and again in April, which put the support for Israel in comparison to Hamas at 82% to 18. Does now that mean everything is fine and we can go home victorious? No, we are being challenged, as I said, as never before, in more battlefields than ever before. And unlike the past, the Arab and Muslim communities are now second and third generation immigrants. They figured out American politics, American marketing, and our younger people are going to face opposition in advancing our pro Israel agenda in ways that our generation did not. And we're seeing the beginnings of it on college campuses today.
So, one of the things I just read in a report online was that some of the college campus protests are actually being supported by Jewish foundations. There's a descendant of Levi Strauss who was identified as one of the supporters. Are we losing American Jews to this
We're
cause?
losing some American Jews. And here I'll go off and opine that uh, a segment of those we're losing on the Israel front um, is because they were taught at home and or at their temple that Judaism consisted first and foremost only of tikkun olam. And so if Tikkun Olam becomes your magnetic north, and that's the sum total of your Judaism, then when that magnetic north comes in conflict with what your friends from your other issues, environmentalism, LGBTQ, migrants, et cetera, are saying about Israel and the Palestinians, too many are viewing their Judaism as understood by a tikkun olam exclusive frame as requiring me to stand with the Palestinians rather than with my Jewish brethren.
So, your role as executive vice president of the Jewish United Fund, the majority of Chicago Jews are not receiving a Jewish education that focuses on Torah and classic texts. The majority are not affiliated. Uh, is this something that people are strategizing how we can shift the messaging, how we can shift the education to the next generation of Jews?
Yes, and looking at a number of different venues to try to achieve that. And so, for example, there is talk of a new non denominational Jewish high school precisely because there's been so much frustration with the CPS system in Chicago. Jewish camps are more popular than ever before, and there's increased attention on what that amazing opportunity to have the undivided attention of young Jewish campers for so many weeks in the summer means for Zionist education and Jewish education. Chicago has by far the largest number of public school students taking Hebrew in the high schools. We've doubled that number in the last 5 years. And by offering Hebrew now as an alternative in the middle schools, we're going to double it again in the next 5 years. And having Hebrew in the public high schools creates an avenue for supplemental Jewish and Israel education.
Yeah, but it wasn't too long ago in one of the Jewish camps that serves the Chicago area that there were counselors who were anti-Zionists. So the fact that we have camps and the fact that we have Hebrew language, that's really not the guarantee that they're getting the right messages.
No, I would say they're getting the right messages. They're choosing to digest other messages they're getting from other data points. And the same dynamic, by the way, would say is at day schools, including the Solomon Schechter system, where in particular, many of the leaders of the anti-Zionist group, if not now, uh, have Jewish camp and Jewish day school experience. So, as important, as beneficial as Jewish day schools are, we know that they're not 100% vaccine proof.
So if you were to give us the list of organizations we have to be wary about, Jewish organizations, Jewish Voices for Peace, if not now, what are the other organizations that are on that spectrum?
There are individual so called synagogues like Tzedek Chicago, which is led by a self described anti Zionist rabbi, and the temple decided itself to become uh, anti Zionist. As important as it is for we Jews to know who these groups are, we spend more time explaining to civic and religious leaders how unrepresentative these Jews are of general Jewish public opinion. That, yes, they're entitled to free speech, they're entitled to call themselves Jewish, but do not, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Senator, Mr. Catholic or Protestant leader, be under the misperception that they represent anything more than a marginal element of our community, just like we wouldn't pretend that a small segment of, let's say, anti-Pope Catholics are in fact kosher Catholics and representative of a large part of that community.
Well, now that you mentioned mayor, we have a challenging situation in city council in Chicago, where we have a mayor who wants to have, I guess, equity between Zion, pro-Israel and anti-Israel, who, takes pride in the fact that he was the tiebreaker vote in a call for a ceasefire that didn't mention the hostages. How does the federation manage the relationships with city council when the relationships with the executive is so complicated?
This is an unprecedented situation for Chicago Jews. If we date our arrival in Chicago to about 1860, this is the first time we can ever think of, that we're aware of, where we wouldn't invite the mayor to a meeting. And when he did invite us, as he did you, we each declined. This is new territory for us. The lesson to draw, amongst others, for the Chicago Jewish community is this mayor got elected by a subset of Chicago voters. That's who he feels indebted to. And most of Chicago Jewry, with the exception of those living in the West Rogers Park area, aren't too excited typically about local politics. We need to go back to basic aleph bet of political engagement to ensure whether it's the mayor or the individual alderman is a friend of our community. The other side, the anti-Israel side, simply out hustled us and the business community for that matter and got one of their own elected. New York is seeing the same dynamic with the Democratic Socialists of America, who have a certain number of seats on the council there. We have it here in Chicago. Lastly, about the mayor. DePaul University has now come out with an amazing report detailing all of the violations of the anti-Israel tent encampment, which they finally shut down 2 weeks ago. Terrible instances of hatred, anti-Semitism, battery, the worst of the worst. The mayor's only comment, however, was expressing concern that DePaul would suppress their free speech rights. Never mind that private institutions have no obligation to protect the First Amendment, which only refers to government's control of speech, not a private institution. The mayor, who on the one hand says he wants to be the mayor of everyone and for minorities and marginalized people, did not issue one word of condemnation against the hatred, which not we, the Jewish community, cataloged, but DePaul University cataloged. And that DePaul report should be a benchmark for every other university who had a tent encampment to have a responsibility to mark down all the violations of their codes of conduct and move to discipline.
Now, I saw that long list, and it was horrific of all of the issues that DePaul had documented. But the question is, do other people see it? Did it really get out there?
Not as much as we'd like. Um, the people who were most outraged, in addition to Jewish students and faculty at DePaul, were the neighbors. Those tent encampments are often near residential areas, and there were parents, non-Jewish parents, complaining about the noise, which violated both city and DePaul ordinances, about the violent and taunting messages that were being sent out to any passerby of the encampment, who refused to join them. It was a very unpleasant setting. So if you lived in DePaul, you experienced it, you walked away with that feeling. But by and large, including by an op-ed today in the Chicago Tribune by the former Secretary of Education, who applauded the compromises and the negotiations and the deal struck by the universities with the protesters. Uh, Too many Americans think it's simply we Jews looking to suppress the free speech of students on campus.
So when you say too many you still feel is a minority, or you think that that's a growing minority we should be concerned about?
Don't know the numbers to equate to either side of it. Much of the commentary in the media has been focusing on the students' right of protest and, of course, bringing up memories of the wonderful 1960s protests. The difference, amongst others, is the violence which occurred from these tent encampments. The word peace was not present. It was AWOL at all of these tent encampments. And each and every one of these tent encampments violated university policies about use of their own real estate. They now, universities have set a terrible precedent that you can violate our policies and there's no repercussions. In fact, we'll cut a deal with you to have you stop breaking our rules. Heading into the fall, there's a fear of lawlessness. And just because, in this case, Northwestern cut a deal with some student groups on Middle East issues, what's to stop another gaggle of student groups come the fall to create their own encampment with another list of demands? Northwestern and other schools have set the precedent. We won't enforce our laws and we will negotiate.
Now, we're coming up to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. We remember the the one that took place with the first Mayor Daley. That was not one of the shining moments in Chicago history. They announced today that it's going to not have as much of a Democratic convention as we had thought, because the president will have already been renominated beforehand in a virtual convention. But are we gearing up? Is our Jewish community gearing up for major protests? Are we going to be counter protesting? Are we going to be doing something?
There's no plans I'm aware of a counter protest. There is discussion of having some exhibits displayed near where the convention is taking place in its hotels, focusing on the hostages. It is going to be absolute mayhem around Chicago, and that mayhem has been aided and abetted both by the mayor and by our county attorney, Kim Fox, who have refused to arrest the protesters since October 7th, whether they blocked O'Hare Airport, Michigan Avenue, Lakeshore Drive, closed down Ogilvy or Union Station. Again, the city and the county have not enforced their own rules. And so the protest groups, which include but are not limited to anti-Israel groups, have precedent on their side. They can literally do whatever they want without a permit and without fear that they will be arrested.
So we're not the city that works at this moment, it sounds like.
If you're a protester looking to create mayhem, we work for you. We
I,
have the welcome mat out for you.
Now, on a much happier note, there was a glorious rally around Yom Ha'atzmaut in downtown, in the open air of Chicago in the Daily Plaza. It was something that a lot of us were looking towards. It's actually something that happens annually, the raising of the flag. Are there thoughts of doing other positive public demonstrations of our love of Israel?
Not that I'm aware of on that scale, but here I'm going to strike a down note. It was exactly as you describe, a wonderful, uplifting event, amazing ruach, created mostly by the students from Ida Crown and Fastman Yeshiva High School. If it weren't for the students, the ruach level would have been much less, and the turnout would have looked much more anemic. We planned this event months in advance, did significant promotion of it. And with a community of 320,000 Jews, if we're generous in our crowd count, we hit 2,000. Um, a rally to be impactful needs to have many elements. a large turnout. I'd submit 2,000 is a minimum. You need to have high-ranking elected officials. You need to have significant, influential non-Jewish leaders there, and you need to ensure significant mainstream media coverage. If you don't have those elements, you're going to have minimal impact and perhaps even worse, a perception that Jews no longer care about Israel. And so the decision to convene a community rally comes with some risks, and better to have no rally than a rally that fails on those criteria. To be sure, it is therapeutic for us who gather at public spaces and shout to the high heavens our love for Israel and the Jewish people. There's absolutely that wonderful therapeutic release of the passion that's been built up for us, not just since October 7th, but for years. We also have to be strategic. And when we do gather the community, ensure it's going to be as successful and impactful as possible. Less than a 1% showing of our community is, I must admit, not a success.
Well, there's a lot more we can talk about, but our time is up, and I'm wondering where the other 99% were, but I have a feeling I know the answers to that, and it's something we have to work on. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Jay, to talk to you on this and also to follow your great leadership in so many different realms within our Jewish community. Thank you so very much for your time, and I really appreciate all of your efforts and all of your expertise. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful
Rabbi Thank you.
bye bye.
Bye bye.